All right, so today we're diving into something pretty wild. A new study that's stirring up the whole climate change debate. And get this, the lead author is an AI.
An AI, huh?
Yeah.
That's definitely not something you see every day.
Yeah, so we're going to break down what this study actually says, the reactions it's gotten, especially from, those who are skeptical of climate change.
Right.
And what this whole thing tells us about using AI in areas that are already, kind of controversial. And I think it's going to raise some big questions for all of us about how easy it is to create information these days, whether it's accurate or not.
Sounds like a fascinating topic for sure.
Yeah, it is. And by the way, if you're enjoying these deep dives, we'd really appreciate it if you could help us hit that 1,000 subscriber mark on YouTube. It would mean a lot.
Definitely. So let's jump into this unusual study. What do we have here?
Okay, so first up, the study itself. It's got a pretty long title in French. Une réévaluation critique de l'hypothèse du réchauffement planétaire du haut humain. It was published in a journal called Science of Climate Change back on March 21st of this year, 2025.
2025 already, huh? Time flies.
Yeah.
And the title itself kind of gives away the main point, right? They're questioning the whole idea that human-produced CO2 is the main driver of global warming.
Exactly. And they're suggesting that natural climate variations, things like changes in solar energy, might be way more important than we usually think.
Interesting. So how are they backing that up?
Well, they focus on using direct measurements from satellites and ground stations, and they emphasize that they didn't make the typical adjustments to this data.
Oh, okay. So that's a key point, right? Because a lot of climate research relies on those adjustments to, account for various factors.
Right. And the authors of this study are pretty critical of those adjustments. They suggest that those adjustments might actually lead to an overestimation of the warming trend in other research.
So they're saying, let's look at the raw data and see what it tells us.
Yeah, basically, and their analysis goes all the way back to 1850.
1850, wow, that's a pretty long time span.
It is. And another key takeaway is that they're pretty skeptical of how historical temperatures have been adjusted. They're implying that those adjustments might exaggerate the amount of warming that's actually happened.
Okay, so that's setting the stage for their argument.
Yeah.
But now here comes the really interesting part for me, who's actually behind this study.
Right. Well, the lead author listed on the paper is Grok 3 Beta, an AI developed by Elon Musk's company, XAI.
Whoa, hold on. So an AI wrote this whole thing?
Well, not exactly. It does have human co-authors, too. Jonathan Kohler, David Leggett's Franklin Soon, and Willie Soon.
Willie Soon. Now that name rings a bell.
Yeah, he's a pretty well-known climate change skeptic, and he's gotten funding from the fossil fuel industry in the past.
So right away that raises some eyebrows about potential influences on the study.
Absolutely. And the reactions to this study have been pretty revealing. It's been shared a lot online, especially by people who are already skeptical of mainstream climate science.
It makes sense. It fits into their existing narrative.
Exactly. And there's one guy, Robert Malone, who's known for spreading misinformation. He was all over social media praising this study, calling it the end of the climate scam.
Wow. So he's really taking this and running with it.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you've got the wider scientific community, which is mostly skeptical. They haven't exactly embraced the study's findings.
Which makes sense when you consider that it goes against, decades of research that pretty firmly establishes CO2's role in global warming.
Right. And it's worth pointing out that the journal Science of Climate Change, it's a scientific publication, but it doesn't have the same, super solid reputation as journals like Nature or Science.
Yeah, those are like the heavy hitters in the science world.
Exactly. And they have much stricter peer review processes, which, makes their findings more reliable.
So where does the AI fit into all of this?
That's what's really making people nervous. Mark Neff, a professor of environmental science, he pointed out that these large language models like Grok 3, they basically predict words based on tons of text data they've been trained on.
Right. They're like super sophisticated pattern recognition machines.
Yeah. But they don't actually reason or do independent research like a human scientist would.
So there's this potential for a false sense of neutrality. Presenting an AI as the author might make people think, oh, well, an AI, it must be objective.
Exactly. But when you look at the co-authors, it's clear that's not really the case here.
Yeah, and especially knowing that Willie Soon and others who are skeptical of climate change were involved in guiding the AI's development, that suggests their views probably influenced the analysis.
Right. And there's another concern. Some studies that have been questioned by scientists were supposedly included in the AI's analysis specifically at the request of these co-authors.
So that's not looking good for the objectivity of this study.
Yeah, and what's also troubling is that there's no transparency about how they actually prompted the AI to analyze the data. We don't know what instructions they gave it or what parameters they set.
Right, so we can't really judge if the AI was truly unbiased or if it was steered towards a particular conclusion.
Exactly. And on top of all that, there doesn't seem to be a scientific ethics committee for the journal or the publisher.
Yeah.
Get this, the whole process from submission to approval only took 12 days.
12 days. That's incredibly fast for scientific publishing.
Yeah, experts are saying it's way too quick, which raises questions about whether the peer review process was actually thorough.
It sounds like they might have rushed this through.
Yeah, and Naomi Oreskes, the science historian at Harvard, she makes a really interesting point. She suggests that using AI in this way could just be a tactic to make old arguments from climate change skeptics seem new and exciting.
So it's like putting a shiny new AI wrapper on an old package.
Yeah, and Gavin Schmidt, a climatologist at NASA, he basically said this new analysis is about as credible as the sources it's based on, which he says are pretty questionable to begin with.
So basically he's saying garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah, pretty much. So what does all of this mean for us? Well, I think it shows how easy it's become to use these powerful AIs to create content that supports whatever you already believe, even if it's not really accurate.
And that's not limited to climate change. Right?
Yeah.
This could happen with any topic.
Exactly. And it makes it even harder for people to figure out what's genuine research and what's just AI-generated content that's pushing a certain agenda.
Yeah, and as AI gets even better at mimicking human writing, this problem is only going to get worse.
So this whole situation with the AI-authored climate study, it raises some huge questions for you, our listeners.
Definitely.
What does this tell us about how AI is shaping public discussion? And how do we navigate a world where this kind of information can be created so easily?
Right. How do we separate fact from fiction?
And what does it mean for our responsibility to be critical thinkers? To evaluate information carefully no matter who or what created it.
It's a lot to think about for sure.
It is. And as AI becomes more and more powerful, it makes you wonder, how can we make sure it's used to help us understand complex issues instead of spreading misinformation, especially about things as important as climate change?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It really is.
Thanks for listening, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.